Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, breaking down the Timberwolves offense. Well, the defense is still carrying this team. There are still some bright spots offensively, namely how the Wolves have performed against the league's best defenses, but I also want to dig into some of the four factors and some of the reasons I have for optimism for the Wolves offense moving forward. Plus, the upcoming schedule is just as tough as the last week or so for the Wolves. We'll break down what I think is going to happen here over the next couple of weeks. It's all coming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy Hump Day. It is a Wolves game day. The Wolves will take on the Philadelphia 76ers tonight. We'll touch on that a little bit here toward the end of the show. But plenty to get to first. I want to spend most of the show talking about the Wolves offense in the wake of another impressive win. And both the offense and the defense played extremely well down the stretch against Miami on Monday. But I want to dig in a bit on some of the peripheral numbers regarding the offense, and also taking a half step backwards and looking at the scope of what the Wolves offense has done this year against the competition it's faced. So I want to do that for a big chunk of the show here today before we get to the upcoming schedule broadly, and then a little bit more in the weeds on the Sixers. So we'll do all that here on the show today. First of all, though, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T Wolves, and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. All right. So obviously the Wolves' big win against Miami. If you somehow missed that or missed the live postcast that Luke Inman and Jack Borman did, or the postgame pod that was Tuesday's episode of Locked On Wolves, go check all that out. And just such an exciting time for Timberwolves fans and for people that cover the team, and for the team, like anybody Timberwolves adjacent. This is such a surreal, like, I know we're only 25 games in, but I mean, if you're listening to this, you likely understand the how big of a deal this is at this stage to be legitimately talking about this team as a true contender. And what's gotten us to this point, 25 games in, not quite a third of the way through the season yet, well past the quarter pole. But what's gotten us to this point is, of course, the defense, right? It's been the league's best defense all year. I've talked a lot about, the effective field goal percentage being league best by like a point plus for most of the season, which is crazy, but yet it's not outlierish enough that we can expect it to come crashing down to earth at some point. It's still possible, but like, it's in line with some of the league's best defenses in terms of opponent effective field goal percentage over the past several years. Like, it's not way out of whack, right? I've talked extensively about 3-point percentage, opponent 3-point percentage. Yeah, there's a lot of luck, but there's also a lot of skill involved in kind of suppressing that. I want to talk about the offense though today, because we spend so much time talking about how impressive the defense has been, and rightfully so. I believe there's some bright spots in what the Wolves have done offensively to this point. And I want to start with the Wolves' performance against opposing top 10 defenses. And I have to shout out my guy, Matt Stegmeyer, sorry. Matt Stegmeyer on X, on Twitter. His handle's at MattSteg4. And his initial tweet actually got some pretty good play a couple of days ago in terms of, people picking up on it. But he had a follow-up tweet that was also impressive, well, it was an impressive tweet, Matt, but like pointing out an impressive statistic, right? So his first post on X was the Wolves are the number one offense against top 10 defenses. So I headed on over to Cleaning the Glass. That's where the screen grab was from. And I dug into that a bit. And Matt's entirely correct. The Wolves are the league's best offense against top 10 defenses. They are 5-0 against teams that have a top 10 defense. And if you look at it, it's pretty impressive. If you look at what the Wolves offense, because remember, this is a Wolves team, depending on where you look, that ranks anywhere from 16th to 18th in the league in terms of offensive rating. So like, let's see here. So on cleaning the glass, which is where we're at. So Wolves offense, it filters out garbage time. So their points per possession, according to Cleaning the Glass, is 14th league wide. If you look at Basketball Reference and you look at their offensive rating, which is just an all-encompassing number, basically gives a picture of efficiency, doesn't filter out garbage time, they're 17th. So I said 16th, 18th. They're anywhere from 14th to 17th, according to these two sites, right? So very much middle of the pack, and they've been bordering on like lower middle of the pack, kind of in the 15 to 20 range for much of the season, basically the entire season to this point. So the overall Wolves offense is not impressive, right? It just hasn't been. It's been very mediocre, and that's the best way to describe it. But again, against these top 10 defenses, the Wolves are 5-0. Now, quick caveat that I want to start. Well, actually, no, let's not start with the caveat. Let's start with the numbers. The Wolves have an offensive rating of 117.2 against those top 10 defenses, 5 teams. I'm going to actually, let's quick do this. Let's run through who those would be. I have it pulled up here. All right, so the Wolves have beaten Boston. Boston is the number 2 defense in the league. They've beaten Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City is the number 4 defense in the league. They've beaten Philadelphia without Joel Embiid. They're the number 6 defense in the league. They've beaten the Lakers. They're the number 8 defense in the league, and they've beaten Memphis twice. Memphis is the number 10 defense in the league, and Memphis has had Jaren Jackson Jr. in both games against the Wolves. So Minnesota is 5-0 against top 10 defenses so far this season. And again, that offensive rating, I'm toggling back and forth between like 5 different Cleaning the Glass tabs. Their offensive rating is 117.2 against those defenses. Super impressive. This is a defense or a Wolves offense that overall has not been good this year, right? Now, quick caveat to that. They're 5-0 against top 10 defenses. There's nobody else on this list until you get to like number 10 that's played against 5 or less teams that are top 10 defenses, right? Like next in terms of best offensive ratings against good defenses is Dallas. They're 7-4. Philadelphia is 3-4 against top 10 defenses. Golden State's 4-9. Indiana is 4-5. But then the flip side of that is look at how bad all these teams have done. Other than Dallas, they all have losing records. You get down to Boston at like number 9. Everybody above them, besides the Wolves and Dallas, have losing records against top 10 defenses. But that's because the Wolves offense has done enough, and the defense has been so good in virtually every game this year, virtually every Timberwolves win this year, for sure. So that's impressive. Like that really matters, that the Wolves offense has been able to show up against stifling defenses. And of course, the flip side of that is, what have the Wolves done against bottom 10 defenses this year? Obviously, they're still winning because they're 20-5. But the Wolves offense against bottom 10 defenses this season is actually 20th in the league, which is just, it's weird, right? It's a little bit like a much smaller microcosm is maybe not the right word, but like a weird, yeah, sure, a weird microcosm of what the Wolves did last year when they were losing to bad teams. This year they're still winning those games, but they're doing it on the strength of their defense and their offense. It's like they just get sloppy and they say, we can do whatever we want. We're going to beat these bad teams. But the defense is so good that it still propels them to a win in virtually every case. Toronto and Atlanta being the 2 examples of the Wolves losing to a bad team very early in the season. And neither one of those teams are like horrifically bad, but they're both teams the Wolves should have beaten. And in hindsight, they're kind of silly losses, right? And even good teams have those, right? Remember when Golden State won, 73 games or whatever and lost to the Wolves, 6-8 years ago, something like that. So that stuff happens. But all that to say, the Wolves offense has showed up against good defenses, and the Wolves offense has been not as good against bad defenses. I don't know that there's really a rhyme or reason to it other than the whole, playing down to your competition in some ways. And here's where I think that this makes sense, that theory makes sense, is the Wolves' overall turnover rate as a team is so bad, right? The Wolves as a team have a turnover rate of 27th in the league, 13.5% turnover rate. According to Basketball Reference, it is the 27th turnover rate. And actually, I could give you the Cleaning the Glass number too, which is going to be similar, of course. But again, filtering out garbage time, the Wolves' turnover rate is 25th in the league, according to Cleaning the Glass. So it's a miserable turnover rate. And actually, let's do this. Let me just quick apply that filter to see how the Wolves have turned it over or avoided turning it over against bottom 10 teams. And I have a hunch that this is I'm just going to just do this here and see if I was right about that. It's actually a little better than I thought. The Wolves have the 18th turnover rate against bottom 10 defensive teams. So it's not like their turnover rate is that much worse against bad defensive teams, but the offense is better against good ones. And I do think it's the plan to level the competition. Then the second piece of that would be, again, this is a theory, is that the Wolves have good isolation scorers. And when things break down and they get stuck in ISO, or you have to ISO against good defenses late in games, against good individual defenders, Anthony Edwards can win those matchups. Karl-Anthony Towns usually wins those matchups. And then that, that's really all you need, right? Those two guys are so good offensively, and that you're able to overcome strong team defense when needed. That's obviously not the preferred route. And actually, speaking of that, I want to talk a little bit about the turnover rate and the 4-factor stuff, and another reason for optimism. And then I want to get into the structure and lack thereof at times of the Wolves offense. So we'll do all that here next. But let's not lose sight of just how encouraging that is, that the Wolves offense has been good against good opposing defenses. And we'll see how that, once we get to the midway point of the season, what that really looks like, if that continues to kind of play out that way. But it's absolutely something we have to keep an eye on here moving forward. All right. As I said, I want to talk 4 factors next. I want to talk Chris Finch's offense and structure or lack thereof. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at eBay Motors. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week, we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So let's see who Josh has picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. And I would say, here, let's keep an eye on Tari Eason. Tari Eason, for me, is somebody who's a ton of fun, because I think Houston, the Wolves haven't faced Houston yet this year. They faced them, I think, January 5th or 6th. Tari Eason is still coming off the bench for the Rockets, but it doesn't really matter as Ime Udoka has found minutes for him. He's a strong fantasy value per minute option who becomes useful to everyone as those minutes tick upwards. I'm excited to see Houston, one of the league's best defensive teams so far this year. Tari Eason is a big reason for that. Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship. And eBay Motors knows the championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. It's the exact same with your vehicle. My first car was a 95 Mercury Tracer, and I loved it, and I wish I'd taken better care of it. Something to do with age, and also something to do with the fact that, with my age, and something to do with the fact that eBay Motors didn't exist back then. But if it had, I would have taken a much better care of my Mercury Tracer. If you've had a car like that you wanted to keep running, or maybe just a cool upgrade you've wanted to have for a while, eBay Motors is the place to do it. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber and not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right. Putting a bow on the first segment and on the encouraging aspects of the Wolves offense to this point. I talked about them being 14th in terms of points per 100 possessions over at Cleaning the Glass, 17th in efficiency over at Basketball Reference. But if you look at the 4 factors, the tried and true 4 factors of determining, offense and defense, and ultimately these, there's a version of it that Jim Peterson does on Bally Sports North. If you watch the Wolves broadcast there, Basketball Reference has their version of it, and then same over at Cleaning the Glass. They're all, very, very similar. Essentially, it's shooting efficiency on both ends of the floor, turnover rate on both ends of the floor, offensive rebound rate or rebound rate on both ends of the floor, and then free throw rate on both ends of the floor, right? The Wolves are top 10 in 3 of the 4 categories on both ends of the floor, according to Basketball Reference. Really impressive. Defensively, the Wolves have had the best effective field goal percentage all year. They've been hovering around 10 to 15th in terms of turnover rate. Currently, according to Clean the Glass, they're 9th, again, filtering out garbage time. 5th in opponent free throw rate, and then they're 18th in opponent offensive rebound rate, and that we've seen kind of fluctuate a bit too. According to Clean the Glass, though, on offense, the Wolves are 6th in effective field goal percentage, league-wide, 56.1%. They're actually tied for 5th with Oklahoma City. They are 10th in free throw rate, and they're 16th in offensive rebound rate, according to Cleaning the Glass. So all of those are middle of the pack or better, right? Obviously the offensive rebound rate being the one that's middle of the pack, but free throw rate and effective field goal percentage top 10. The only thing that's out of line with middle of the pack across the board, like you take the 4 factors of both ends of the floor. So 7 of the 8 numbers, the Wolves are in essentially middle of the pack or better, and top 10 in what did I say? 5 of the 10, or 5 of the 8, excuse me. The only one that's out of line, that's in the blue percentile range. If you're looking on Cleaning the Glass, right, they have the kind of the heat map where it's the redder or the oranger it is, the better, and the bluer it is, the worse. The only thing that's blue is turnover rate, 15.2%. That's 25th in the league in terms of turnover rate. And it's one of those things that is so avoidable, and it's so much less of it is it's not anymore Karl-Anthony Towns just being crazy and like running guys over. Like, was it 2 years ago he led the league in terms of I think he was number 1 in personal fouls league-wide, and he was number 1 when it came to percentage of his personal fouls that were being committed on the offensive side of the ball. That's not happening as much anymore. There's been a couple games where he's done that. He had the game, 3-4 games ago, where he was just chucking the ball in the stands, had like 6 or 7 turnovers, just a really bad performance in terms of turnovers. But it's not on him. It's just a team-wide issue where part of it is how careless they are early in games. And what I should have done is pulled by quarter, actually. I'd be willing to bet that their turnover rate is brutal early in games and much, much better towards the end of games. And I don't know if it's like this psychological, hey, we know we're going to win this game. We're really good. We can kick the ball around a little bit early and fall down 15 like they did a couple nights ago, or 17 like they did against Miami on Monday night, and still come back and win. Like at some point that's not going to fly, right? Like it's probably not going to work out against Philly on Wednesday. It's probably not going to work out against the Lakers on the second night of a back-to-back on Thursday, right? And it hasn't worked out in the losses the Wolves have had that have been ugly. New Orleans, the Phoenix loss, like those were really bad. And those were essentially over from the get-go because this exact thing happened and the Wolves couldn't pull it together late, right? They were sloppy with the ball on offense. They took bad shots. They threw the ball away. And how many of these are just careless, like a missed dribble handoff between Ant and Rudy or Ant and Cat, or, just a mishandle on the perimeter from somebody like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, right? Like it's just the careless turnovers that add up. And for the Wolves this year, they've led to these just brutal starts. And then in the losses, they've snowballed into just bad overall performances. And then in the wins, they straighten things out. And the defense is so good. It gives their offense some cover, really. And does buy them some time to kind of figure things out, work the kinks out. So what's encouraging to me here is everything else, right? The only 4 factor that they're struggling with across the board is turnover rate. I could also, if I wanted to nitpick, and this actually goes into my next point, which is related to the Timberwolves offense and the relative lack of structure that they still have, is the volume of 3-point attempts. The Wolves are actually 7th now league-wide in terms of percentage from outside the arc, 38% as a team. Following the Heat game, coming into play Wednesday, the Wolves are 7th in the league in terms of team 3-point percentage, 38%. Very, very good. They're still only 19th in terms of 3-point attempt rate, and they're 24th in attempts per game. Of course, rate kind of takes pace into account. So still bottom half of the league in terms of volume of attempts. That's my only gripe here with the Wolves offense to this point, other than the turnover stuff. They still have to shoot a few more threes. And schematically, the more Chris Finch schemes up and the more he actually implements in games, the more threes they're going to shoot. And early in games, they just have a little bit less structure. They just kind of run pick and rolls and see if they can kind of feel it out with the, they'll get some big pick and roll with Cat throwing lobs to Rudy. You'll get Ant doing that. There's less structure. And then it seems as the game goes on, Chris Finch installs more of these. We're seeing a lot more horn sets lately, different twists and variations off of that. The Wolves do a lot of double drag screens in transition. And they're getting, that's been really successful for them. And that is not necessarily a set. Sometimes it is a set play call, but it's also just kind of a secondary break action that the Wolves run. They just get into it out of the fast break. And those things have worked really well for the Wolves that aren't technically set plays, but it's like, hey, let's do this. Like if we can, based on the defensive personnel on the floor for the opponent, let's get them in double drag action and get ourselves a dunk or get ourselves a wide open cat 3 or get ourselves cat in isolation on the perimeter, getting somebody on a sloppy closeout, driving past them for an easy layup or an and one at the rim. Just sprinkling in a little bit more of this structure. And the more we've seen the Wolves do that, both progressively in terms of the first 25 games of the season, because there was very little structure to the offense early in the year. And we're seeing more and more of it now as the offense continues to ascend. And again, up to 14th in terms of points per 100 possessions at cleaning the glass. And it was, around 20th for a long time. But we're also starting to see in games, as the game wears on, the offense has more structure. And also, what did I just talk about? The turnovers seem to lessen as the game goes on, right? So the more structure this team has had offensively, the better it's been. And of course, you're still going to get those fast break opportunities, the ant dunks in transition like we saw against Miami. The Wolves are still winning fast break points. Transition offense and defense has actually been pretty solid this year. That's a topic for another day, but especially compared to what it was last season, but given the athletes that are on this team, that's all been much better as well. So more structure is good for this Wolves offense. They can always score, as I said earlier, when things break down, when you're in a tough spot, late isolation. We saw both Cat and Ant score in isolation against the Heat because they needed to. But the preference is, for the majority of the game, you're running structured sets. You have more of a free-flowing offense that comes out of these structured sets that Chris Finch rolls out or comes out of the secondary break in transition. And it's not just simply playground basketball and ISOs. When you got to do it late in quarter or late quarter situations, late clock situations, or you got to do it at the end of regulation or whatever, fine. You have the talent to do it, but that shouldn't be the primary, mode of offense. And I don't think Chris Finch thinks that it is. I just think he needs to occasionally implement a little bit more of that structure. I realize I'm nitpicking. We're talking about a team that's 20-5, and depending on what happens to the Celtics on Tuesday night, I'm recording this actually during the Celtics game. They're going to have the best or the second best record in the entire NBA. So I'm nitpicking. I get that, but we talk about the Wolves daily, so there's still things that aren't perfect. All right. I want to close by talking about the upcoming schedule. We'll briefly talk about the Sixers, the Wolves' opponent on Wednesday night. We'll do all of that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at Game Time. You should not have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event, and that's why Game Time is such a fantastic site to learn about, a fantastic app to learn about. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. There are so many different ways you can get tickets over at Game Time. They're actually the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show you your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal without hidden fees, and you can buy your tickets in seconds with 2 taps. They have exclusive flash deals and sponsor deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball once we get to springtime, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. You can also use their zone deals where you pick the section and Game Time picks the seats for an average of 18% savings. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, let's first look at the upcoming schedule for the Wolves before we get into the Sixers matchup specifically. Of course, the Wolves have Philly tonight. Philadelphia, actually, as of right now, is surpassed Indiana in terms of the best offensive rating. We'll talk about that in a minute. So they're actually number 1 in offensive rating league-wide. They're number 1 in terms of point differential, Pythagorean win-loss, all that, that checks out as stronger than the Wolves to this point, a top 5 defense. This is probably the toughest game the Wolves have had. I mean, I don't know. We've said this a lot the last couple of weeks because it's been a tough schedule. The Wolves have passed all the tests to this point. This is a difficult game for Minnesota. Beyond Philadelphia, the Timberwolves have the Lakers back at home at Target Center on Thursday night. However, it's the second night of a back-to-back. Believe it or not, it's only the second back-to-back the Timberwolves have had all season long. The only other one was that loss in Phoenix after playing in Golden State the night prior and, winning 2 games at Golden State, the in-season tournament game, going to Phoenix. That was always going to be tough, and the Wolves were destroyed by the Suns in that game. This is only the second back-to-back they've had this year. Last year, they were pretty good in back-to-backs, for whatever that's worth. Then the Wolves go to Sacramento on Saturday to take on the Kings. The Kings, of course, beat the Wolves pretty easily in that in-season tournament game, which ultimately was what eliminated the Wolves from the in-season tournament back a couple of weeks ago, almost 3 weeks ago now. That's Saturday, so that's another really tough game. And then you go at OKC after a couple of days off. That's the day after Christmas, next Tuesday, before you go back home to take on the Mavs. The 3 first, these are all really tough games. Like, you could make an argument. These are, I don't know, we've said this a couple of times, but certainly toughest stretch, right? The Sixers, they're certainly a top 3 team. It's like Wolves, Celtics, Sixers in some order are the best 3 teams in the league. Lakers, after traveling on a back-to-back for the Wolves, that's going to be really tough. Lakers, of course, haven't played well since their in-season tournament win, but it's still a tough game on a back-to-back. And honestly, like, if the Wolves split those 2 games, you feel pretty good about that. At Sacramento, tough matchup for Minnesota. At OKC, certainly winnable. The Wolves have beaten the Thunder once, but then versus the Mavs. So, like, looking at this schedule, if you just look at these 5, and every time I do this, I feel like I'm a little bit not pessimistic, but I try to be realistic. Like, 3-2 looks good here, right? Like, if you beat the Sixers, that's a nice win. You can't expect to beat the Lakers 24 hours later. That's tough, right? So they probably split those 2. And then they probably lose one of either the Kings or the OKC game and beat the Mavs at home. So I'm going to say 3-2 in the next 5. Now, last Wednesday on the Minnesota basketball party, which, by the way, is the next episode in your feed, unless you're listening to this early on Wednesday, it's likely that the Minnesota basketball party is in your feed right now. But last week on the show, we predicted how the Wolves would do in their next 3 games, which was leading into the Mavs Thursday night, the Pacers on Saturday, and the Heat on Monday. I said 2-1. I actually thought the Wolves would lose to Dallas. Well, I was dead wrong. The Wolves won a couple of those games going away and then came back and then held on against Miami. So they went 3-0. Credit to Jack Borman, editor-in-chief at K-Supis. He's on the basketball party. He nailed it. He said they'd go 3-0. He was 100% right. I'm going to say in these next 5, they go 3-2, and I'm happy with 3-2 during that stretch. Now, of course, the Wolves are back healthy now, right? Like, at least everybody played in the Miami game. So that's certainly going to go a long way as well to giving the Wolves a shot at being better than 3-2 in these next 5. All right, real quick, that Sixers matchup, the Wolves beat Philadelphia once, but of course, Joel Embiid did not play for Philadelphia. If I remember right, I'm going to pull this up real quick. I want to say they were on a back-to-back. Yeah, they were. Philly had played at home and an overtime loss to Cleveland, traveled to Minnesota and only scored 99 points in a loss to Minnesota with no Joel Embiid. So that was actually really similar to the Phoenix loss for the Wolves. The night before was an in-season tournament game, went to overtime. They travel, they lose in Minnesota. Maxey only had 16 points on 19 shots. Nobody on the Sixers scored more than 16 points in that game. The Wolves got 31 from Anton. They got 23 and 11 from Cat. They got 13 and 11 from Rudy. So, double-doubles galore for the Wolves. Really strong games from their stars. Nas had 13 off the bench. The Sixers actually aren't a terrible matchup for Minnesota. They're just a really good team. Like, I'm not at all saying it, actually, let me pull up the line real quick here at FanDuel. It's not a bad matchup. They're just really good. So it should be a great game. Like, that's what I'm really looking forward to this game. Now, Thursday against Lakers is maybe a bit of a different story on the back-to-back. I don't have a whole lot of hope for that one. The Wolves are 3.5-point underdogs at Philadelphia, according to our friends at FanDuel on Wednesday night. That feels about right. I mean, it would be a legit upset if the Wolves won at Philadelphia in this game. Again, the Sixers are healthy. Marcus Morris didn't play on Monday due to an illness, so he's questionable for Wednesday. But, I mean, like Tyrese Maxey's been great. Embiid's been fantastic. He's only missed 3 games. One of those was the game against Minnesota. He's averaging 34 and 12 this year. Joel Embiid is. It's a fun matchup because you get Embiid versus Cat and Rudy and Nas. You get Maxey. The Wolves the Wolves do have guys that can check Maxey in the perimeter. And, we'll be curious to see how the Wolves kind of handle those defensive assignments to start the game. But it should be a really fun matchup. Philadelphia, top 5 offense, top 5 defense. They're great at getting to the free throw line, which is obviously a concern. The Wolves have been really good at not fouling too much this year, save for a couple of games, but they're like, I think the Wolves are 5th in terms of defensive free throw rate over at cleaning the glass. They're also, Philadelphia's a fantastic rebounding team. They're top 5 in offensive rebounding. They're 11th in defensive rebounding. Across the board, it's just a really good team. And if I'm the Wolves, like, I guess you try and they played a similar pace to Minnesota. For me, the key is going to be defending without fouling as much as humanly possible, which is very difficult to do, and battle on the glass, right? Try and muck things up a little bit. Just know you've got more bigs than they do. And that's going to be a pretty good strategy most nights. So to me, it's muck things up, win in the paint as much as possible, try and frustrate Embiid. You've got enough perimeter guys to slow down Maxey. It should be just a ton of fun on Wednesday night. And then, of course, we'll do the post-game pod here on Thursday on the Locked On Wolves feed. And then Thursday night, the Wolves take on the Lakers. So we'll do a post-game pod on Friday as well. So multiple post-game pods, multiple live postcasts upcoming this week. It's a packed week here at Locked On Wolves. All right. That's all we got for you today here on the show. Of course, a big thank you to those that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. This show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.